I'm Sarah Grew. I'm a visual artist, both photographer and a painter, a mixed media sort of person, do a whole range of things. This project is the Ghost Forest, and it really grew out of my feelings of deep pain from caused by all the forest fires we've had on the West Coast here. And the fact that the fires are getting worse and worse due to climate change, I felt that as an artist, I needed to speak about that. In the past sort of 5 or 6 years, that's really become the focus of my work, as I feel that I need to participate with art on that level. And I think that art has the ability to reach people in a different way and teach people about climate change and get them to reflect and think. And that's really the point of all of my work, is to try and get people to think and notice and pay attention to the world around them.
I'm Jon Bellona. I'm a sound artist and an educator. I work at the University of Oregon as a career faculty in the School of Music and Dance. I got invited in as part of this exhibit with Sarah Grew and her work Ghost Forest. The piece currently where we're in is LaVerne Krause Gallery at the University of Oregon. And the show is part of Haunting Ecologies, which is kind of a Kickstarter and celebrating the 50th anniversary of CSWS. So I initially created Wildfire in 2019. It was shown in New York in a few spaces. In recreating this work for this space, direct conversation with Sarah Grew, the artist of Ghost Forest, in how can Wildfire and this work be in dialogue with and not totally take away, but amplify the memories of the trees that she's made in this work, and kind of create a space that works as like a multimodal experience. The audio of natural environment sounds that are interrupted by wildfire events, followed by extreme silence that kind of gives space and embedding itself and wrapping around in conversation with the ghost forest. And so using sound, I got rid of narrations. I kind of edited and deleted things. I added and elongated environmental tracks to kind of help create an environmental space so that viewers could really focus and kind of get lost in a forest environment in looking at Ghost Forest that's then clearly disrupted with the actual wildfires, and then followed by silence as a way to kind of use our ears that we're listening outward to this wildfire event, that then in that silence we're then reflecting back on inward self, inward listening, and also then it gives space in reflecting to Ghost Forest itself. And that cycle kind of repeats, that we have after about a minute of silence we return back to bird song and insects buzzing and whirring and wind through trees into the forest, and that repeats in its cycle, similar to kind of wildfire events where you might have the ash and the dissipation of sound, but then we have a return of life and habitat.
Well, this piece started with the fires in 2020. As I said, I was devastated by the feeling of being in a forest fire that we all acquired when the Holiday Farm fire happened. And I found myself going to fire sites, and there's a real stark beauty and in a burned tree and in a burned log, and I love the patterns and the ways that the coal looks, those dark coals look. And so I was very attracted to them materially, and I collected some burned wood, and I was thinking, I've got to make something out of this so that I can speak about the fire, and I want to make something out of this. And it took me a while to come to the realization that a few months, before I realized, I can make carbon prints. And carbon prints are is a very intense, crazy photographic process. It's one of the most, if not the most, archival process that there is. It was developed originally by a Frenchman, Alphonse Poitevin, in 1855. The carbon process is a transfer process, and so you start with what's called a carbon tissue. And until 2010, you could buy carbon tissues pre-made and in up to 20 to 30 different colors, because although it's called carbon printing, because it was originally used with the carbon soot from gas lamps as the colorant, you can use any kind of mineral to create that carbon tissue. And so it was a process that in the early part of the 20th century, if you wanted an archival print, you had a carbon print made, and it was it's a very specialized process because of that. It's a process that is finicky. You can have, I went to a residency and the water I was using changed, and all of a sudden nothing would stick to my glass sheets anymore because the pH of the water was different. It's a process that is finicky in that, as you can see from my work, the edges will frill and tear, and that's something that I'm using, but if you're trying to create the perfect photograph, that might not be what you want. I had never tried it before I tried to work on this project. I had seen them in the 1920s. It was really popular to make carbon print lantern slides, and where you have a film positive on glass. And those lantern slides were some of the first things that were used for projection, like PowerPoint projections. And also people made lampshades out of them. I knew about that, and so some of those ideas influenced my idea about printing on glass. I wanted to print the work on glass because I wanted to talk about how fragile the forests actually are, and the glass is so fragile that I wanted the work to be as fragile as the forests themselves. I also wanted to incorporate the whole entire history of photography, and since this is one of the earliest processes, it does that, and I have in the work a few old photographs from the 19th century and from the early part of the 20th century that I didn't take specifically in order to incorporate that whole history of photography.
I took recordings of just fire sounds, and kind of the process in which I'm doing is I'm utilizing fire science in conversation with fire scientists, various models of different materials that get burned, tall grasses, crown fires, both thinking about the topography, the weather, the fuel content, moisture, as a way to generate a kind of fire spread. Fire science often thinks about how fire spreads, and I'm kind of morphing that into kind of how most listeners coming into a gallery space might perceive, which is velocity, how fast something might travel. There's like this churning that happens, this whooshing of fire out of around like really low frequencies that give a sense of scale and power and depth that I wanted to kind of amplify in the fire sounds that I just couldn't get if you just try to bury microphones in the ground and try to capture an actual wildfire. And so that science and those models I'm using coming out of conversation with fire scientists. And then on top of that, there's just documentation around actual wildfires and how fast they were spreading at that point of time. And so there might be a peak perimeter spread that I'm having that conversion into velocity for this work. Delta Fire or Camp Fire, which destroyed the city of Paradise, California in 2018. Those fires had a really rapid spread of and destructive force, 83 miles per hour for campfire. And so wanting to map that across the entire gallery space to help viewers kind of embody or that experience of a wildfire that totally just disrupts the kind of serenity of an environment. The work itself comes out of a direct response from Delta Fire. I was actually driving along Interstate 5 going into California when I was diverted off of the interstates because of this wildfire, and reckoning with the kind of red sun that's blotted out and the smoke that's covering the landscape that really has this an apocalyptic vision, and acrid burning of your nose, and the fact that something could just completely shut off a mode of transportation all the way from Seattle to LA and disrupt kind of civilization in that way, this natural force. I wanted to bring that out and kind of document it in some way. And so I often will try to think about and use sound and listening, this idea of amplifying and connection as a way to bring audiences into a work or into a space. And so with Wildfire, being able to kind of map or sonify the force of fire's spread across the gallery space at rapid speeds, sometimes upwards of 83 miles per hour.
The piece as a whole is called the ghost forest, and that actually is a technical term for a time when a forest suddenly dies in an entirety, and it's most commonly used when you have a tectonic movement or a volcanic movement that causes a forest, the roots of a forest to get buried in water, and the whole forest will die. And so there's a few other ghost forests in my ghost forest. There I've included the ghost forest that was from a volcanic action in the bottom of Clear Lake in Oregon, where a volcano in 1700 erupted and created Clear Lake by damming the river there. I also included in the piece photographs of all the different stages of the life of a forest. So it incorporates photos with snow, and photos that are of burned forests, and photos that are the spring flowers and the little mushrooms, and photos of a burned tree down at the beach, because of course a forest moves to a beach. So those are all kinds of forests that I included. I included some Joshua tree photos from Southern California, and for those of us who aren't from the desert, the spacing between the trees makes you feel like it's not a forest at all. But of course, if you're a forester or someone who lives down there, that is a forest. And so I included that kind of forest, and really trying to speak to what a forest is in that way, but also to what a forest might remember if we ask the forest what it could remember. And so a forest might remember a clear cut, it might remember a person walking through the forest, it might remember the springtime and the different changes of seasons. And so I like to think of the photographs as kind of the forest memories. I tried to also include in the work different kinds of trees to speak about different aspects about climate change. I included a live oak tree, and live oaks are the tree that sequester more carbon than any other kind of tree because of keeping their leaves all year round and because of being fire resistant. And I did happen to find a beautiful oak tree right on the edge of a forest, of a fire, and so that survived the fire, and so I took a picture of it specifically for the piece.
I do like collaborating and working with science and art, and kind of this nexus point of how science can inform art practice, or how art can also open up conversation for thinking in different ways for science. For example, my work also involves data sonification, which is taking data and mapping that into sound, both for exploration and understanding. And it's really a great way, not only in data sonification, but creating artworks, is to kind of spark a conversation or offer a new perspective. And I think that's the one thing that the arts can do, is to offer new perspectives and new ways of engaging with material that open up conversation, which is really important, especially in a work like this with Haunting Ecologies, when it's a direct conversation around climate change, and dialogue and conversation is necessary to, and perspective and new perspectives are necessary to come up with solutions and do something and act, which is we've got to do now.